You're listening to the Study Podcast with Dr. Paul Wegner. I'm your host, Tyler Sanders. I'm here with Dr. Paul Wegner. Study Podcast. He's going to give us the Hebrew word of the day, and I think it is a Hebrew word of the day. Is that right?
Yeah, this one is just one.
All right, let's get into it.
And it's on the book of Lamentations. I forgot to tell you, we still got to do that one.
That's right. Yeah, I think last week we were thinking Ezekiel's next.
Yeah. Oh, anyway, so all right, so we've got Lamentations, and basically the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 or 587 in that time period was one of the major events of Israel's history, and so it was I would say it was probably the most important thing for them, and it changed their thinking. It changed a lot of their lives. So to have a whole book on that does not actually surprise me, because it's so important in their lives. So all that's kind of like background. And now we've got the word. It's the word Eka, and it seems it's almost like a it occurs 17 times in the Bible, and or in the Old Testament, and it can be translated a whole bunch of different ways, like how or where or what or alas.
Oh,
but it's almost it's like a sign that there's a lament coming, or that you're in the middle of a lament. So it's almost like that kind of explanation almost that we do, and that's what this is like. But it can be translated a lot of different ways. But it begins our book, and that's telling you that this is a lament that's coming. So it's kind of neat. Not often do you get actually a word that actually tips off the kind of genre that you're going to have, but this one pretty much does that.
Yeah, it's giving you a hint of an emotional state.
Yeah.
Is that kind of how the word functions?
It seems like it. It's very strong, so it's kind of interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a real Hebrew word of the day.
Yeah.
The book is really interesting too. You've probably heard of alphabetic acrostics.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it actually has 4 alphabetic acrostics in it. So the first 4 chapters are all arranged in that way. And then the last one is just a lament, and it's not in alphabetic acrostic format.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, I would have never picked up on that, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, and some people won't know what that is. So I've got a chart to actually helps them see it, or slide. This one's actually pretty easy to date. It's got to be after 586, right? Because it can't have a lament about the destruction of Jerusalem until there is a destruction of Jerusalem.
That's right.
So, but the bigger question is, who wrote it? And tradition has said that Jeremiah did, which makes some sense. And in one of the passages, it talks about him weeping. His eyes are running like a river, kind of like what he said in the book of Jeremiah, if you remember. So it's very plausible that he could have done it.
Okay.
The audience is probably Judah, though I think it could be broader than that also, because at one point he basically talks about Edom being destroyed. So it could be broader. And the purpose is clearly to lament over the destruction of Jerusalem. That's real key. And in verse 5, chapter 5, verse 1, I think is like the key verse. Remember, O Lord, what has befallen us. Look and see our reproach. And that kind of summarizes the book pretty well, I think.
Yeah.
All right. Does all that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
All right. So we've got 4 laments that are alphabetic acrostics, and then one that's just a plain lament. Originally, it didn't have a title, but the first word was that or o, or how, a common lament formula. The Septuagint even translates it as wailings or weeping or something like that.
Yeah.
The author is traditionally Jeremiah. Some people have said there's contradictions with that. Like Jeremiah prophesies the destruction of the temple, but then Lamentations 1:4 says, nations enter the sanctuary, those that should not enter into thy congregation. in my mind, those really aren't contradictory.
Yeah.
You can know that it's going to be destroyed, and yet you should also can know that those people aren't supposed to be in the congregation of God, so they're
Yeah.
trampling in there, and they know they shouldn't be. So
Hmm.
I don't really see that as a problem. And the other one
Yeah.
is Jeremiah knew Babylon was God's weapon of destruction, but he calls for
Mm.
vengeance upon them. And
Sure.
again, I don't see a problem with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even the Assyrians were God's weapon for Judah at one
Yeah.
time or at a certain
Right.
time, and yet Isaiah talks about
Yeah.
destroying them and having them be punished for it.
That
So
that's exactly where my mind went
yeah,
with Assyria and Isaiah, that like you see that they're going to be this rod
yeah,
that God is kind of using them to, punish Jerusalem, but also that there's a punishment coming for them.
yeah, good,
It's a bit of a complicated idea, but it's
yeah,
present.
yeah,
Um,
and it's certainly not beyond a person knowing that and being able to say that.
yes.
The structure is Lamentation contains 5 poems. The first 4 are alphabetic acrostics, meaning the first line begins with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet.
Yeah.
And then the last one doesn't seem to have any structure. But here I've got on this slide what I'm trying to point out. So the letters in the yellow are basically the Hebrew alphabet. And as you can see,
Hmm.
they pretty much line up verse by verse.
Yeah.
So that'll help people, hopefully.
Yeah, we see this other places too, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
there's a couple psalms that are kind of function
Right.
in this way.
Yeah, and the famous one is Psalm 119, but
Yeah,
there's
right.
there's even other ones other than that that have the same structure. So,
Yeah.
um, uh, chapter 1 starts off that it's a time for mourning. The city's been destroyed and it's empty, and so it's time for to mourn. Then in verses 8 through 11 talk about they look at their sin, and that's why they were punished. Verse
Mm,
11 makes it real clear that God won't tolerate their sin, and
right.
because of it, they must be punished. And
Yeah.
then starting at verse 12, Yahweh has dealt justly with Judah. So it wasn't
Mm,
like God was gone, and that's why they got destroyed or anything like that. God purposefully did it, but He did it because they deserved it. So they
yeah.
make
Right.
yeah, it makes it real clear. So that's good.
Yeah.
Here's how it starts. Verse 1 says, "How lowly sits the city that was full of people. She has become like a widow who was once great among the nations. She who was a princess among the provinces has become a forced laborer." And remember, a lot of times when they went into were taken as prisoners, they would actually become slaves, and that's basically what it's
Mm,
talking about.
yeah.
And then in verse 18 it says, "The Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against his command. Hear now, all people, and behold my pain. My virgins, my young men have gone into captivity. I called to my lovers, but they deceived me. My priests and my elders perished in the city while they sought food to restore their strength themselves." We just got done with Jeremiah, which was explaining pretty clearly how much the sin, what the sin was like. And
Yeah.
so to have this Lamentations where he's saying God was just when he did it, that makes total sense compared to the
Yeah.
passages
Right.
around it.
Yeah.
And in chapter 2, it's talk about Yahweh has punished Judah, and that no doubt there's no doubt about it that it was Yahweh. Okay, so he makes
Mm,
that real clear. The effects were devastating, infants mourning, and even like that it
mm,
talks about. And then Judah's defeated and humiliated in verse 13 through 17. And then the last one is a cry to God. But at that point, I put there it's a little too little and too late.
mm,
Already, Israel or Judah specifically, had done enough things that God needed to punish them.
yeah.
And our next book, Ezekiel, is going to even make that more clear. So,
Mm,
especially around this time of the exile, we've got a lot of prophets making sure they know why God's punishing them.
yeah. Right.
And then here's a couple verses from chapter 2, starting at verse 2. The Lord has swallowed up. He has not spared all the inhabitants of Jacob. In his wrath, he has thrown down the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. She has brought them down to he has brought them down to the ground. He has profaned the kingdom and its princesses or princes. Um, often a city is pictured as feminine, and in Hebrew, that's
Mm.
pretty logical because the idea is she's the mother of the inhabitants of the city and gave birth to
Yeah.
them. So it's
Right.
real common for, and we saw that in Isaiah. We'll see it in other passages too, but there you saw it here too.
Mm.
And then verse 21 says, "On the ground in the streets lie young and old. My virgins and my young men have fallen like by the sword. You have slain them in a day of your anger. You have slaughtered, not sparing. You've called, as in the day of an appointed feast, my terrors on every side. And there was no one who escaped or survived in the city of the Lord's anger. Those whom I bore and reared, my enemy annihilated them." So
Mm.
it's interesting how the author is picturing himself as going through this too. So it doesn't surprise
Mm-hmm.
me that traditionally it was thought to be Jeremiah who has
Yeah.
already explained these kind of things. So it
Well, and it
makes
kind of sounds
sense.
like it's personifying, the
Yes.
city of Jerusalem here, right?
Yeah.
If it's like my children, kind of,
Yeah, which is again real common in poetry. It actually
Yeah.
uh, pictures, metaphorically kind of, but it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then the third lament is in chapter 3, and it talks about the lament of the wicked for 18 verses. And then in verse 19, it starts pleading for God's mercy. Even in the midst of the destruction, they recognize that God is merciful and kind. And
Mm.
so they're calling out. And then verses 40 through 66, which makes this a very long lament,
Yeah.
talk about there being hope in God's mercy. So
Mm.
verse 40 says, "Let us return to God." And I put on there, it's never too late to turn back to Him.
Yeah. No, there are a lot of verses then in chapter 3, but it's still in that acrostic format.
Yes,
So just
yeah,
in our kind of translations, we have broken down
yeah,
multiple verses under each letter, essentially.
yeah. That's the
Yeah.
same way, like in Psalm 119. There's 8 verses for each,
Yeah.
and each
Yeah.
one of them starts with that same Hebrew letter. This doesn't quite do that, but it has
Hmm.
multiple verses and then has the next one that starts with the
Mm.
alphabet letter. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Verse 31 says, "For the Lord will not reject forever, for he causes grief, then he will have compassion according to his abundant loving kindness. For he does not afflict willingly or grieve the sons of men." That's actually interesting, right? So, in the middle of a lament, they're now realizing that God is not a tyrant. Once he
Yeah.
punishes, he does have mercy, and so he's actually explaining that, you know, God will come back, and we already saw that in Jeremiah, didn't we? Remember, Jeremiah was to buy that land even though he
Oh,
knew
yeah.
that
Right.
exile was coming. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now here's the verse that I thought sounds a lot like Jeremiah, verses
Mm.
48 and 50. "My eyes run down like streams of water because of the destruction of the daughter of my people. My eyes pour down unceasingly without stopping until the Lord looks down and sees from heaven." See there,
Mm.
the idea of him weeping sounds
Yeah.
a lot like Jeremiah.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
I'm not saying for sure I know he did, but it
Yeah.
certainly would make sense.
Yeah.
All right, now the fourth lament. Again, very similar, same kind of stuff. The misery of the siege, and it's pretty good at explaining the great desolation that had come. And
Mm.
then in verse 11 through 20, the humiliation of captivity. And that's something probably we really wouldn't understand unless you've actually gone through it yourself. But he makes
Mm.
it real clear, about how humiliating it is and how
Yeah.
you're basically slaves after that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then 21 and 22 talks about future punishment for Edom. Um, I don't know if you remember, but some of the other books will also say that Edom was one that stood off to the side and almost like cheered as
Right.
their brothers were being destroyed, and
Yeah.
the prophet is saying they need to be punished for that, and they
Yeah.
actually will be. And then chapter 5. Now we've got the last one that's not in an alphabetic acrostic.
Yeah. An acrostic kind of format.
Yeah, and it's a plea for remembrance and then also a plea for mercy. So both of those are in that. So it's really interesting to me that in the middle of laments, you've got them calling out for God's mercy and actually believe that he's gonna deliver them because he is a merciful
Yeah.
God.
Right.
That sounds an awful lot like the Psalms, doesn't it? A lot of times you'll have these
Sure. Yeah.
Psalms of complaint or something like that, but by the end they're praising God for
Yeah.
upholding them and keeping them strong and having mercy on them.
Yeah.
So
Right.
so again, it shouldn't surprise us that you've got this in the middle of the book of Lamentations too.
Yeah. Right.
All right, here's some of the verses from it, like verses 1 through 3. Remember, O Lord, what has befallen us. Look and see our reproach. Our inheritance has been taken over to strangers, our houses to aliens. We have become orphans without a father. Our mothers are like widows. And in verse 19, you, O Lord, rule forever. Your throne is from generation to generation. Why do you forget us forever? Why do you forsake us for so long? That sounds like a psalm also, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Restore us to you, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew our days as of old, unless you have utterly rejected us and are exceedingly angry with us.
Mm.
So there's still that possibility, but they don't believe it. All
Yeah.
right. What's the purpose of this book in the Bible?
Yeah. That's a good question. Like there's I think there's a really clear case for why it had a lot of value then, right?
Okay.
It's kind of this expression of mourning over our guilt,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
this thing has happened. We kind of thought it never could happen. We acted like it never would happen,
Yeah.
and it did. We've kind of lost our city and
Yeah.
our freedom, our identity in some ways because now we're no longer able to be on our own, right?
Yeah.
We're a captured nation.
Why do you
And
think?
and I
Oh, go on. I was wondering, why do you
well,
think the book of like the Bible needs something like this in it?
yeah, yeah. I think that's a really good question, and I kind of wanted to get into this with you because this is kind of a hermeneutics question
Okay.
too, right?
Yeah.
There's this really clear. I think in the idea of history, there's this really clear understanding, and I think there's value to for later generations as they look back, um, maybe I don't know if those in captivity would have had access to this or not, but certainly when
Yeah.
you've returned back to Jerusalem, when they've returned back to have this kind of
Yeah.
expression of this, you kind of see the depth of how bad it was and the results of that were and how everyone felt about that.
Good.
And there's certainly a value in keeping that. But I think there's some interesting kind of hermeneutics questions you kind of spin around on a little bit for what does this mean for a Christian today,
Yeah.
right? For
Yeah.
those who are kind of we've been grafted into this
Yeah.
narrative, but we didn't really experience it necessarily,
Yeah.
or our forefathers didn't really necessarily experience this specific thing. So why is it here? And I what I wanted to ask you about
Okay.
was I remember reading this in college, and I kind of had this sense of like, oh, there's like this flavor in the Bible I wasn't very used to reading or hearing about.
Okay.
This kind of sadness, a lot of times in
Yeah.
maybe not just Baptist life, but kind of evangelical life, we want to be very positive and
Yeah.
optimistic, and there is a lot of joy, of course, in the Christian life.
Yeah.
But there's also pain. Life has all kinds of pains and things that happen and
Yeah.
that are difficult to walk through.
Yeah.
So my immediate assumption is, yeah, like this is partly in here for our own personal life as we go through issues, whether those are caused by sin or not, and we kind of
Yeah.
have a little bit of freedom in that to say, like, just to mourn
Yeah.
and to experience that you know, the sadness, and then walk through that process of like,
Yeah.
I don't think it's questioning God, but kind of kind of figuring out like why do bad things happen
Yeah.
if you know God is all powerful? Why do we have to go through any kind of pain or suffering? What does that kind of mean? How do I integrate that in
Yeah.
my understanding of my life and walk through that? And I think there's really good answers that we get in Lamentations, not just in Lamentations, but there are some comfort we get in seeing that we share this experience with all of, you know, all of God's people.
Yeah.
But that also there's something to kind of learn in here that, you know, God is still God, even in those
Yeah.
the terrible times.
Yeah. I think there's also something about owning your own sin. And
Yeah,
I think that's clear in the book of Lamentation. They don't
yeah,
say, God, you did this to us. We didn't
that's right.
deserve it. They were
Right.
clear. They deserved it.
Yeah,
And now what they're hoping is that God hasn't let them go forever, that
yeah,
he still has hope for them. And I think that's good for us, today.
yeah,
If we can see a book like this where God clearly punishes them and shows them,
yeah,
that he's not going to tolerate their sin, but he hasn't let them go either. And then we're going to learn in some of these other books that he's still got a message for them. He's still got a job for them. So he's
yeah,
not abandoning them, but he's certainly not going to tolerate their sin, and he's certainly not going to tolerate them,
yeah.
blatantly going against what God tells them.
I would imagine a lot of people, as they're going through their salvation
Uh-huh.
experience, probably there's a lot of parallels between their experience and Lamentations, of
Yeah.
this kind of acknowledgement of sin and this kind of recognition of
Yeah.
um, the depth of one's sin, and kind of having this when you kind of realize that, I think there is this a bit of a fear of like, wow, like I
Yeah.
really know I don't deserve
Yeah.
God's love and his care.
Yeah.
And there's something kind of maybe the parallel is that kind of positional understanding of how I relate to God,
Good.
and how in Lamentations there's this kind of similar recognition of like,
Yeah.
what's happening to me is what I actually deserve,
Yeah.
but I hope God has mercy on me. And you kind of live in this. I think it creates humility. It creates it just positions us correctly, I think,
Good.
in how we relate to God, because we kind of are recognizing his power and his strength over this, and our job isn't to fix all that, but it's
Yeah.
to depend on him and to hope.
Yeah.
And of course, as Christians, that's through Christ.
Yeah.
And there is, of course, space for optimism. When I was saying that earlier, like that's not bad. I don't think
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
bad that Baptists are optimistic,
Yeah.
or have this kind of hopeful, this hopefulness when it comes to God and how we relate to him, and
Yeah.
because we get that in Christ. But that's paired with this kind of recognition of the depth of our sin.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. And I think this book is almost crucial now. And Tyler, I think you're telling me, how does this apply to us? I think you just
Hmm.
hit the nail right on the head. I think we all go through times of sin and wandering away from God. And we
Yeah,
need to know he does. He is there. He will punish, but he's not going to abandon us.
yeah,
And I think
yeah,
that's crucial.
yeah,
I think we've answered our second question almost. So what can we learn about God, our response to God based upon this book? And I
yeah.
think you just hit the nail on the head with that one.
Yeah, and abandon is a really good
Yeah.
word, I think, that God doesn't
Yeah.
abandon.
Yeah.
That yeah, that's one of those things we can have faith in with God, is that um he's completely persistent in this.
Yeah. Good.
He does not ever give up.
Yeah. And you kept seeing that with those little messages of hope
Mhm.
and belief
Yeah.
and pleading for his mercy. So
Yeah,
there's
that's
always
right.
those coming through, even in the midst of a book on Lamentations.
Yeah, right. That's completely right.
Oh, well, it's a smaller book, but I think it's a valuable book to teach us some things about God.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's really good, and I think it's really helpful to think through the historical context of this as well, and kind of see,
Yeah.
why why the people of Israel were in this situation at this time, and what's leading that, because that does give us a good sense of the flavor as we're reading it ourselves. We don't want to only just think of how it applies to ourselves. We want to kind of see it in the bigger narrative of the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great one to read, and it is a short one. It's kind of an easy one to maybe not content wise an easy one to read,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
for sure it's easy one to work through.
Yeah. That's good. Well, all right, we'll get ready for our next one.
Okay.
We're hopefully getting into Ezekiel next, and so
Yeah,
that's our next one.
that sounds great.
Okay, see you next week.